Hi, everybody, and welcome to this, the latest edition in our podcast series brought to you by the team at Export to Japan. I'm Steve Crane, and we have a very special guest joining us today who is going to help us learn so much more about the world of marketing and some of the best practices and latest trends in marketing in Japan. And that guest is Nanako Aramaki. Nanako, there she is smiling away. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Steve. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, good to have you on board, and certainly looking forward to learning much more from you about the best practices with marketing in Japan. Before I dive in and start chatting to Nanako, just a little reminder to you all listening in, please subscribe to the Export to Japan podcast series. We've got a whole range of podcasts lined up for you coming along. So if you subscribe, you will be notified. And if you enjoy this content and this conversation with Nanako, please go ahead and hit that like button. So Nanako, without any further ado, let's just dive in. And to kick off, I'd like to know a little bit more about why Japan is so distinctive. And from an overseas company's point of view, why should overseas companies consider getting specialist help when they start to think about marketing in Japan?
Very good question. So I think anyone who's been to Japan will know why Japan is so unique. You arrive in Tokyo and it's like a completely foreign world. Digital signs, advertising, screens, lights everywhere. All the machines are talking to you. It's a completely different language and a completely different culture, but it's just so much more than that and what's on the surface too. The last 2 years I've lived in Tokyo and I've managed to somehow localize myself to Japan. And I've just learned more about how people really think and behave in Japan. And I think a lot of those things really need to be taken into consideration when you're putting together a Japanese marketing plan and strategy. So some of the other things might be like purchase behavior. People are more cautious, I think, in Japan when they're making purchase decisions. And it's the same when it's online. I mean, our specialty is in digital marketing, so we mainly only deal with online platforms. But people are very cautious. So you need to make sure you have a lot of information online. And so that sort of changes the design. So people have different design preferences as well. It's just the list goes on. So it's very unique. And go ahead.
Yeah, we'll dive into some of the detail of that because you're already touching on some interesting points there. But I guess you're so well equipped to have a view on this because I know you lived in London for a number of years, didn't you? And until you moved back to Japan a couple of years ago. And I remember that's the first time we met and we connected. So you've had that unique insight of spending time here in the UK. I remember, and from your accent a little bit, you've perhaps spent some time in the US or in Canada as well. So you've obviously got a very unique insight into the different cultures and the different ways that consumers think and on the B2B side as well. So you're well equipped. I mean, when you moved back to Japan a couple of years ago, did you feel any sort of cultural change readjusting back to Japan, or was it just how you remembered it from when you previously lived there? How was it for you after living overseas for a while?
So let me explain that I've only lived in Japan until I was 3. And I grew up in Canada. So I lived in Canada from when I was 3 to my late 20s. And after that, I lived in Germany for 4 years and in the UK for 6. So it's my first time living in Japan as a working adult. And it's a completely different experience. Obviously, I'm familiar with Japan just through pop culture or, the TV shows and manga that I read or through family and the various trips that I've made to Japan. But it's very different to actually live and work in Japan, just to see how people treat you, in a business setting or how people behave in a meeting, things like that. It's all really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, that must have been so much fun for you picking it all up again after, when I say after being away for so long, I guess you can't even remember what life was like.
Yeah, it's basically like the first time that I lived here.
How bizarre, how unique and strange for you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when we think about overseas companies entering the market. And of course, a lot of the listeners to our podcast on Export to Japan are foreign companies and UK-based companies that are looking at Japan for the first time. Do you think they have to work harder as foreign companies that are entering the market compared to local domestic Japanese companies when they do their online digital marketing? What's your thought on that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you're a domestic company, you already know how your consumers are going to behave, maybe a little bit better than a global company that is used to implementing a global strategy to almost all of their new markets before they start to customize their strategies. And I've seen, we've all seen companies succeed and also fail in Japan for that exact reason. They haven't properly localized from the beginning, which is what you really have to do in Japan. Like, I have spoken to some companies that think they can just launch their international strategy in Japan and use their content and just translate, for example. But just translating is not localizing. So, as you can imagine, they're not doing as well as maybe they thought. And I'm not going to mention who they are. But and then, I have, because I do sales for Tamlo, I have also spoken to companies that think they can just do marketing in English. And Japan is not like some of the other Asian countries where a lot of the population does speak English. In Japan, I believe 90% of the people don't think they're proficient in the English language.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I think even in Asia, Japan is ranked 9th in terms of English proficiency. So
wow.
it's
And I like the particular little nuance you said there about they don't think they're proficient, because I think you and I both know, and I know from my experience in Japan for many years, often the level of English is quite high. But your point is right. It's about people not sort of having the confidence or believing that, right? And that's the barrier for foreign companies to be aware of and to deal with.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, look, if we start to look at some of the detail, I think a good start point that people always talk about is the whole issue of kind of trust in a brand and in a company. And that's a big issue again for foreign companies that are coming into the market. What are your views on that? Do you have any thoughts about how Japanese consumers feel about trusting foreign brands and some of the work that foreign companies have to do to try and earn that trust?
I mean, there's so many studies and surveys done that show this in numbers. Japanese people have a hard time trusting international brands over domestic brands. And I think because of that, overseas companies need to do a perfect job of using the Japanese language and understanding the Japanese consumer before they launch. Otherwise, it's going to be really tough from the beginning. And some of those things might involve doing a proper market research before launching a campaign in Japan. We do digital marketing, so we offer like social listening, for example, but that's just, research on social media platforms. But I would encourage companies to maybe come to Japan and see what it's really like firsthand, because then exactly, how serious it is. It's very different.
It makes sense. It makes sense. That little expression you mentioned there, I have heard of that and I have some familiarity with it, but let's just expand on that. You referred to social listening. What does that mean exactly, Nanako?
Yeah, social listening tools exists that help you to analyze some of the behaviors on social media platforms. And some of the ways that we use it is we take a look at what people are saying about a particular subject. So if you want to learn about, I don't know, orange juice in Japan, then, you would search for a hashtag or related hashtags and see, what kind of conversations are being had in Japan around that subject. Or you can also do an audit of particular social media platforms, profiles on those platforms, and see, what works in that particular market. So there is a lot you can do with it. It's not just social media too. You can research on blog platforms as well to see what types of things people are talking about and search through comments as well. Yeah.
So are you sort of suggesting that as part of that early stage market entry strategy, you know, you spoke about doing your homework, doing your research, learning about the nuances of the local market, and then getting your strategy right. And as part of that, this sort of social listening and understanding the dynamics of what's going on in the orange juice sector or whatever sector you're working in, that's all part and parcel of what you would recommend, is it, as part of getting the strategy right and getting the market entry right?
Yes, definitely, especially for a unique product or service, we highly recommend doing that. If it's something that maybe me or like my team members are familiar with, it's something that we can consult and help with without extensive research. But we usually conduct a workshop with our clients so that we get a better understanding and make sure that we're taking the right approach for localization for that company.
Got it. And I want to come on to that a little bit later about how you, particularly from your example, how you engage with your clients and go through the process. So I'll come back to that question in a moment. But
Sure.
Just to keep the flow going, the next point I wanted to understand a little better was you touched briefly on the difference between Japanese consumers' appetite for sort of design and look and feel and consuming information. And I've certainly seen examples of how Western companies promote and market themselves and what their priorities are in the way that they like to have their design of websites, marketing collateral, etc. And I've seen how Japanese companies do it, and I've seen a difference there. But I'd love to hear from your perspective. What's your sort of professional view and take on that, please?
Sure. I think we also, mentioned about trust issues in Japan, and it goes back to that a lot, I think. So Japanese people like to do a lot of research before they finally purchase something. And so if you're a business selling in Japan, you want to make sure you have all of that data and information and customer reviews and where all the materials come from and everything available to the user, because they will need that information to make that decision. And if you don't provide it, then they'll go with somebody who does provide that information. So that means that your website might be a little bit more cluttered in Japanese, because you need to provide that extra information. I've also noticed, when I'm doing some online shopping or I click on an ad in Japan, the landing pages are really long and you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And it's just, it's everything you need to know. And I'm usually convinced by the end of the landing page, like, I need to buy this product. Because they have everything, well thought out. They have all of the testimonials that you need, and it's very convincing, and it's absolutely necessary. So my opinion is that some of the Western campaigns, it's just not enough information. I think a lot of people in the West feel like, oh, well, if they want to know the information, they'll contact us. But in Japan, Japanese people don't really contact you. So I've been talking about B2C, but for B2B, you really need to have like case studies in a PDF that people can download, or white papers. Demo requests don't really work. People don't want to confront and talk to anybody until they have all the information and have documents that they can share with their superiors, so that everything is already signed off internally before they contact the company. So you want to make sure you provide all of those tools for them so that they can make that decision. So that changes a lot of design and UI, UX factors, I think, for any company in any industry.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And I get totally what you're saying. And it sort of sounds like from a design aesthetics point of view, we like to make things look, have clear space and beautiful imagery and minimal sort of information because the product photographs may be so beautiful or something. And sometimes I know when I've looked at Japanese websites, they look so cluttered, right? There's
Yes.
so much information. You feel like you're being beaten up by information. But the point you're making so well is that's more about the practical side of it, isn't it? It's giving the consumer, whether it's B2C or B2B, giving the customer the information they require, and not assuming or relying on the fact that they will come and ask for the information or be prepared to take a bit of a risk with the product before they've got the information. You've made that point really well.
Yes, really good point about risk. So Japanese people don't like to take risks. So they're very unlikely to return items if they buy something. So, they don't want to make a mistake from the beginning. So that's why they're very cautious. I also feel like for websites, I encounter this all the time throughout my entire career in marketing. But if you take a global website template and put Japanese in it, it doesn't always work out because of the line breaks. Sometimes it reads odd and it's not the best line break where the sentence should be. And so I think a lot of those reasons are why Japanese have like their own website, or maybe it works better if you have your own website instead of like a multilingual template, because then it looks better. Because if you have those odd line breaks, people know right away, oh, it's not properly localized, or it's just some global company. Or, like, of course, Japanese people like the really nice, sleek designs as well. But if it's like too international looking, they might feel like, oh, it's just an American company. And I've heard that opinion through some of our clients' social media management. So we try to use localized content as much as possible.
Yeah. And I guess what you're talking about here is this is the fine detail about building that trust and really giving the Japanese market the impression that you're really making the effort and you're serious about the market, right? You're investing properly.
Yes.
And this is the detail that makes the difference, right? In the Japanese customer's eyes.
Yeah. Okay. Even the smallest error, they might be like, oh, it's not a Japanese person.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, just as sort of an aside, but it does relate to the discussion. One lovely example I pick up on is when we get involved in running trade missions and visit programs to Japan, bringing international companies to Japan. And I love it when visitors come for the first time and get kind of mesmerized by the level of customer service in Japan. And you even see it at the airport, don't you? When you arrive at the airport, with the way that the staff deal with the cases coming down the carousel, and the way that you get greeted at the bus terminal before you get on the bus. And as the bus departs, people are bowing as it disappears down the road and things. And that whole level of customer service is kind of enchanting, and it's wonderful. And it's lovely to see people's faces when they come to Japan for the first time and they see that. But then I always make the point that the sort of sobering point is that that's the level of customer service that Japan is used to, right? That's not something special they're doing for foreign visitors that come. That's the everyday level of customer service. And for us foreign people looking to do business in Japan, we have to be aware of that level of customer service. And we even have to work harder because we're not domestic. So you have to at least try and match that level of customer service, if not do it even better. It's a pretty high bar to try and get to, but it's kind of a similar example. That level of customer service is another thing that differentiates international companies, by understanding the level they've got to get to. And it relates to many of the points you're making about marketing and your digital online presence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's such a good point about customer service, because it really is that, and guaranteeing that the customer is going to be satisfied if they choose you. And you need to be able to claim that, if it's online, then on your website, or, an FAQ section, or one of the downloads, you need to make that promise so that they can trust you enough to take that step. But I think, that level of customer service, I feel like people I don't think people can understand it until they see it. It really is out of this world.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's another great reason to make that. If you're serious about the market, make that trip to Japan and
Yeah.
come and feel and experience and breathe all of this in. And that's the way to learn it, isn't it? You're right. Okay.
Exactly.
Now, you spoke a little bit about some of the sort of technical points there, and some great points you raise about developing your website locally and using the right platform or the right framework for your website. Just to expand on that a little bit, what about sort of platforms in general in Japan and methods of communication digitally, this area that you work in? Are they similar, or are there any unique parts of the Japanese way of working that we should know about there?
Yeah, this is another great point. What makes Japan so unique from other, especially Western countries? Because of course there are, unique platforms to China with like WeChat, for example, and Alibaba. But in Japan, it's like we have Rakuten, and Yahoo Japan is the most visited website in Japan, not
Wow.
Google.
Wow.
Yes, it's the
Wow.
#1 platform in Japan.
Amazing. Yeah. Who would have
And
guessed?
yeah, and that's the hardest thing for people to understand. Like, what? It's #1? But yeah, but it's Yahoo. And we need to explain it's Yahoo Japan. It's owned by SoftBank. It's a different company. And they've really succeeded. And it's really embedded into the everyday lives, of people here in Japan. As you know, like people use Yahoo Shopping, Yahoo travel, navigation, weather. I have my trustworthy Yahoo weather app and transit app as well. Yeah, it's all really well localized, and it's probably the best for Japan in those specific fields. So people use it here, and I think, yeah, the Yahoo brand is very strong in Japan. And it's really hard to get through into people's minds that come from the West.
Yeah, it's another perfect example of why it's necessary to get local help, right, and local support, because you're quite right. Something as fundamental as that, most people outside of Japan wouldn't have a clue, right? And if you
Yeah.
make that mistake of not knowing, then your whole marketing strategy and the tactical implementation of it could be going in the wrong direction or not focusing in the right area. So yeah, really, really interesting. Well,
Yeah.
one other point I wanted to pick up with you, we're all familiar with the obviously the terms of sort of translation and what that means, and we also know a little bit about localization. But I know that I've heard you on previous discussions we've had, and when I've seen you in action, you've used this expression called transcreation, and I'd like to just ask you a bit more about that. What does transcreation mean, Nanako?
Yes, transcreation is some genius has obviously created this word. We can't take any credit for it, but it's translation and creation put together. So it's not just translation, but it's also taking into consideration market knowledge and cultural knowledge, and also the actual translation, and marrying those three to create copy that actually makes sense to the local market.
Got it. Yeah, very, very well summarized. And I guess this is the essence of what agencies like yours do, right? This is what you practice, and this is the value you bring to foreign companies that are coming into the market. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You'll find a lot of translation companies, but they are just translation companies. And it's really difficult to make that distinction if you don't understand Japanese. But we do spend a lot of time editing translations to make sure that it makes sense.
Got it. Okay. I mean, there's that old classic, isn't there, about people that use machine translation, Google Translate and things like that, and the mistakes that can come out there. And fortunately, I don't think too many people rely on that in a business sort of environment. But yeah,
I get but there's still a lot of signs, like Japanese municipal signs, that have really cute English.
Oh, okay.
All
yes,
over
I
the
heard
country.
about that. There's a few dedicated websites that even show these, and it's quite amusing the stuff that happens. So actually, it happens both ways, right? So some on the Japanese side,
definitely,
misunderstandings can happen. It's a two-way process. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. I want to take a step back. We sort of touched a little bit on websites, and I wanted to just ask you a deeper question related to that. Another important factor is obviously this whole world of SEO, search engine optimization. Are there any particular comments you can make on how foreign companies should think about SEO, or are the principles of that exactly the same once you've got your Japanese website? Any wisdoms you can give us on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think SEO works kind of the same way in every country and in every language. So there's nothing really specific to the Japanese market, but it's definitely recommended. I mean, if you have anything online in Japanese, you should consider SEO when you launch that content, because it does take time for it to be reflected within the search results. Some might take months. And some of them years, a year maybe, to see real results and to rank on the first page. So the approach that we take for SEO is through content, and that's worked really well for all of our clients. So we create SEO articles. So articles that contain specific keywords that you want to rank for. But what we're learning more and more, and especially with Google's algorithms changing, they're not really caring too much about, how many times the keywords shows up, or, do you have the keyword in the meta description? A lot of those things are maybe lower priority compared to a couple of years ago. Now they want to make sure that it's content people want to read. So we put our efforts more into finding the right writer and making sure that it's a good article that people want to read.
Okay. That's great. Great advice. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just a sort of sub question that just came to my mind on that and I'm thinking about the wide variety of listeners and members we have on the Export to Japan platform, covering many sectors. From your perspective, does your company work on any particular industry sectors, or do you have expertise to cover any and every sector?
I wouldn't say every sector, but we are quite wide ranging when it comes to sectors. I'd say we have a lot of B2B, global B2B clients. So our B2B expertise has grown a lot over the last few years. And I would say, specifically speaking, technology. We have a lot of technical writers on, in our network of freelance writers, and a little bit of medical, like our editorial manager. Her background is medical, so she writes excellent medical articles. But other than that, it's quite wide. So we can support. Yeah, we have a huge network of writers that specialize in different areas. So I'm sure we can find somebody that is suitable.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. Okay, one more topic I wanted to ask you about, and this is something that we are hearing more and more chat and questions about on the Export to Japan platform, is the area of influencer marketing, which is something that has grown hugely in the last 5+ years. What does the Japanese landscape look like with influencer marketing? Is it as strong in Japan? Is it a new process? Does it happen there? What's your advice on that one, please?
So it's actually huge in Japan. And going back to that consumer trust, for some reason, Japanese people trust information on social media more than any other platform online. Yeah, so they are active on social media, and they trust what they see and hear on social media, which is probably why influencer marketing is so successful here. And there are tons of micro influencers as well. Those are influencers that only have, a few thousand followers, but some brands prefer to work with many different micro influencers rather than spending a lot on one very famous influencer, for example. But we have a B2B client that we run an influencer campaign for, and it's been a blast because their approach is so new and unconventional. They're open to working with influencers who are not necessarily experts in that field. And it's really helped to sort of widen the net, so to speak, in terms of reaching different audiences.
Interesting. And I know Instagram is one of the obvious ones that people think about. It's certainly big here in the UK and in the US, but how about in Japan? Is it mainly Instagram, or do you have other platforms where influencers are strong and active that we may not know so much about?
Yeah, I'd say that in Japan, it's mostly Instagram. I know there are other platforms and apps that young people use that I don't really use, like TikTok and what was the other one? Like 17 Live. There are some other couple, channels where people go on and they get money for creating content on there, and some of those people make really good money, and so it's a whole market unknown to myself but it is definitely a growing market. And in terms of Instagram, it is in a sense, it's quite unique in Japan because I believe Japanese people create the most amount of story content. Stories. They post the most number of stories worldwide, I believe. Yes. So reaching those, people, users in their 20s, I think even in the 30s might be best to use Instagram. But going back to platforms, Steve, Twitter's very big in Japan. And speaking to some clients, I know some clients are hesitant in using Twitter because globally, maybe they're getting rid of it. And especially in light of what's been happening lately, some companies might want to steer away from Twitter. But in Japan, my impression is that a lot of that international news is not really affecting usership. People are still using Twitter, and it's massive because of that ability to be anonymous. So that's another thing that's different about Japan is people don't really want to take responsibility for things that they do or say, which is not unnecessary. So they would rather state their opinion and share their opinion without claiming their identity.
Understood.
So
that's really, really fascinating point, actually. And another
very unique to Japan.
Yeah. Because that point you're making about how people would use Twitter based on those circumstances, I remember from a previous discussion a while ago picking up it's almost the opposite with regard to LinkedIn, right? I believe LinkedIn is not growing quite as fast in Japan as the rest of the world. And it's for exactly the opposite reason that people are not so keen to put all their personal information and history and data and their points of view up on a public forum, which would link exactly with what you're saying about maybe why Twitter is growing in popularity faster.
Yes, they're very concerned about having their data out there. I spoke to a few people, Japanese people, and they were saying exactly that. They don't want to have their personal information out, or they're asked by their employers to not go on LinkedIn so that they're not headhunted.
Right. Interesting. Another wonderful, peculiar dynamic. Well, not peculiar, it's understandable, but it's another interesting dynamic of how the just people's mentality and thinking and approach in the consumer world and the business world is different. And one of the key messages I think coming out from this discussion is don't make assumptions, right? Because if you just assume it's all the same, you're going to be completely wrong. And that's very much a theme that's coming out from your conversation here.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say the younger generations have been behaving closer to the Western counterparts. They're maybe a little bit more price conscious, whereas I think traditionally Japanese people tend to buy lots of luxury items and pay for the quality instead of, the value or price. So it's changing a bit, but that being said, there is still a lot of that traditional Japanese behavior is still very much in play, like loyalty, like people are quite loyal, like not leaving the company and staying with the same company for 10, 20, 30 years, things like that. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Well, Nanako, we touched on so many different areas and you've shared so many different wisdoms with us, and it's very clear the sort of breadth and depth of your experience and knowledge. I'd just like to sort of bring it to a bit of a conclusion by understanding a little bit more about how you how your company engages with its clients. So, you know, if we have some listeners listening in here that are thinking about approaching the Japanese market for the first time, and they've listened to this discussion and they suddenly think, yep, we really need to get some help. How do you typically engage? You know, what's the kind of commercial relationship and time span, or what's the process that you would go through?
Yeah, so I would say that typically what we would do is we would conduct a workshop with our clients. We would get maybe 5 to 8 stakeholders to join an interactive workshop using Miro, and so that everyone's kind of on the same page as to what their brand is, or how they want to be perceived in Japan, or who they want to target in the Japanese market, and what the messaging is going to be in Japan. So that really helps us to understand and make sure that we're creating the right strategy, because without that, there is a lot of back and forth later on where maybe we weren't on the same page about something. So we really do recommend having that first workshop. And then we create a strategy that's very specific to Japan. A lot of our clients are sort of international companies that have an office in Japan, and there is a Japanese team, but maybe we're dealing directly with the APAC manager or the global marketing manager. So some companies have found it helpful that we have a London office. So then, you know, we can accommodate different time zones, which can be a challenge. So that's something that we are used to doing. And then,
Yeah, really interesting point there. So you mentioned that often the role you're playing is in support of an international company that already has a Japan operation there, but you're adding value to the process between the overseas head office and the local Japan office, supporting that process.
Yeah, it's I really enjoy what I do, and I feel like the part that I enjoy the most is kind of being that like middleman and helping to support both sides. So I'm beginning more and more to understand the Japanese side, and so I want to make sure that the Japanese team are getting what they need for their company to succeed in Japan. And sometimes the global counterpart doesn't know how important that is, or they also have, you know, their global agenda that they find really challenging to communicate to their Japanese team members. So we are often in the middle trying to help with the communication and strategy to find a compromise that works for everyone.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, I get it completely, and I can see the reason why there is a need for that as well. So you guys are filling a great value gap there. So, well, that's wonderful, Nanako. It's been a really great discussion, and thank you so much for sharing all sorts of great insights from your, I guess it's many years of knowledge that you've acquired that you're now distilling into this role that you're doing with Tamlo. And I think for everyone listening in, I hope that's been a really great discussion. I think we've been able to dive in and sort of learn a little bit more about all the many different important ingredients of getting your marketing campaign and your digital marketing campaign right. But I think the overriding point is back to where we started this discussion with Nanako, of realizing the need for local help and having experts that understand the local market and know about all these nuances and all these dynamics and have the capability of helping guide you through it. So for anyone that's looking to go into the market, or even if you're already in the market and you want to just sort of improve what you're doing and go to that next level, I would urge you to reach out and find Nanako. Her URL is there on the screen. We'll also put it up somewhere here on our screen when we publish this, and the QR code is there, and that's it. Yeah, Nanako. And yeah, the QR code and look up Nanako on LinkedIn or anywhere else.
Yeah,
and,
this is my LinkedIn. You can reach me there, or you can visit our website, take a look, and contact us through there.
Super. And you mentioned you have an office in London as well, Nanako. I know you're based in Japan, but you have your London office as well. So we
do, and they do the opposite of what we do, right? They take Japanese clients and help create English content.
Brilliant, amazing.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, listen, great to catch up with you again, Nanako. Thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure to speak with you.
It certainly is. Yeah. Thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone listening in, please subscribe, please hit the like button, and we will be back soon with more content from Export to Japan. So thank you, Nanako. Good to catch up.
Thanks,
Bye now.
Steve.